The interesting thing about Bob, to me, was that he was very much of the same ilk as Tony Wilson and Rob Gretton. And what he was doing was pretty much what Tony was beginning to do, what Rob Gretton had done, funnily enough, when he did his label in Wythenshawe. So they were very much like-minded people. The interest in doing it as a group was that it was you were so prolific as a group then. God, I wish it was like that now. You were writing songs all the time, and what you wanted most was it just to come out. And Tony, with the factory sample, we'd just written Digital and Glass, and he said, right, let's go and record it and put it out. Buff, we were like, wow, this is mega, this is. And then we did Atmosphere and Dead Souls for the French label. We were really open, there was no thought about, is this a good commercial decision? It was just a way of getting your music out there as soon as possible. I had Earcon 1, actually, the record, which I liked a lot. I liked I'd sort of grown up with samplers from when I was a kid, with The Age of Atlantic, 99p, because they were cheap, and you got some great acts on them. It did actually introduce you to wider music. It was good. And so it was quite natural to be included in samplers. Here in Earcon 1, we thought it was great. Rob went along and spoke to him, I presume, and said, he'll put you 2 tracks out. And we were going, there was no, he trusted you in the same way that Tony Wilson trusted you. And literally we did the 2 tracks, which was Auto-Suggestion and From Safety to Where. And he put them out. And it was just dead nice and simple, because life was nice and simple in those days.
And you mentioned Bob's ideas come from a similar place to Tony and Rob's. Just want to go back a little bit to when you first met Bob last. Would it have been on, because I know Warsaw supported the Rosillos, which Bob was a manager of. Can you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember Bob, to be honest. I was so young and probably so engrossed in myself and so excited by what we were doing. But the Rosillos tour was a weird lineup. I think Bob did it more as a friend for Rob Gretton and Tony, I presume, more than anything else, because the Rosillos were really big. They'd had a couple of hits, I think, by then, and they were a big group. The Undertones were opening, and Joy Division were in the middle. It was a very strange bill, really. It was proper up and down. But it was interesting because, it was a very, the Undertones had just started. They'd had a huge hit, been championed by John Peel. They had a real buzz about them. Joy Division had the same buzz, but in a completely different genre. And then the Rosillos, again, completely different. They were very poppy, very classic pop. So yeah, it was quite, you got an interesting audience reaction, to say the least. And we seemed to suffer most of it. But you were just all, you were all of the same persuasion. Bob, Rob, Tony, all the groups. Nobody was thinking about money or success. The main important thing was to play and to be allowed to play. And it was as simple as that. And I thought that Bob made a very, very interesting record. The way he looked at music and the groups that he had. I was a fan of all the groups he had, Gang of Four particularly. So you knew that he wasn't closed. He was very open. And it was important to you at that time to be open, to do everything, to do anything, to have a go at anything. It was nice. We felt you were in very good company.
And that's interesting. You mentioned the diversity of the lineup, because a lot of the Earcon compilations are incredibly diverse. The Earcon.
Yeah, but that's what I liked about it, because Factory Sampler was very diverse. Factory as a label was very diverse, and it was interesting being involved in it. Because you listen to things that you'd never normally listen to, and I thought that was one of Tony's strengths. And I think again, with regard to Fast, I think that was where they were very alike.
Can you tell me a little bit about what was going on behind Factory with? I know Bob, when we spoke to him, he said that Tony and Rob would call up and give them little bits of advice, and I think, rather than anyone taking ideas, I think it really was just people having similar ideologies and it coming together. So you can tell me a little bit about Factory's very obscure release record numbers, which are, it's quite similar to Fast. It's not it's not like you release a record of Fac 1 was a poster, Fac 2 was.
Yeah, I mean, Tony in particular had a really strange way of looking at everything, and it was very hit and miss. Some of it was very valid, and then some of it you'd look at as a complete affectation. And I think a lot of the time he used to do it just to wind Rob Gretton up. They had really had a very, very healthy sparring relationship. But the thing is that the wonderful thing is using someone's success to create something that's interesting. And Factory and the way that they numbered the egg timer from God. I mean, even I look at the listing now and I'm looking at it going, what? Someone's cat, it's just mental. Hacienda Cat had a number and all that lot. And interestingly, the last fact number was Tony Wilson's coffin. So I suppose it's quite apt, really. But I mean, it was just about having fun. Things were very much fun in those days because none of it particularly was done for money. And it was all to further communicating and getting out in the world. I'd never been to Scotland. I'd never been out of Manchester hardly. I'd only been to London once before I started playing. So, to get to these places, it did seem intensely exotic at the time. And the fact that you weren't, worried about the money side of it just meant that everybody had the same attitude. It's quite naive, and it's wonderful to look back on it now and realise what a good time most of us had at that point. But it was about being wacky, and they were really wacky, and I just think that they, like tracks.
Imagine his tongue firmly in his cheek when he said about Bob was saying that he gave, there's like 12 Fast releases, the last one to the Dead Kennedys. He said Factory 13 was Factory Records. He just didn't tell Tony.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. No, I mean they turned out to be great friends, and they did actually inspire each other in doing it. And it was very difficult. What Tony did with the Factory sampler was quite radical. The way that he had us doing the sleeves, it really did feel as if you were in this kind of close-knit, all working together to do the same thing. For the first few releases on Factory, the bands actually made the covers, for Vinnie Riley, Dorothy Column and the Factory sample, in the same way that we'd done Ideal for Living. You'd sat down and done all aspects like a cottage industry. And it did make it much more important to you, and much more, you felt like you were in control of it. I think that, there was interesting things about that, like with the Rosillos. It proved that whilst Bob was a great manager and very inspiring in everything that he did, he still can't control a group. There's still that unpredictability about the people you're working with, which does make it challenging, But I mean, it's a great, when I consider that I'm still making music because of people like Bob. I mean, on the getting back together with Peter Hook and the Light, and the first thing we did was play the Earcom tracks. They were included in the chronological ride through Joy Division's catalogue, and they're fantastic tracks. We were very lucky. They were both produced by Martin Hannett. From Safety to Where was written in the studio. Martin Hannett simply shouted when we'd all set up, we need another track for the record. Play now. We went, hey? Literally, he pressed record on the 24 track, and me and Steve wrote Safety to Where, and it was just literally from start to finish. And Ian put the vocal on it, and Bernard didn't like it, I remember, and put very, very reluctant guitar on it that really makes my guitarist in the Light laugh. He just goes, it's like the least you could possibly do on a track, but it worked. It actually worked on that track, and we did some backward stuff, just for fun. Got left off the LP, and we were left with 2 tracks, Auto Suggestion and Safety to Where, that we didn't know what we were going to do with. Perfect. To put it out with Bob on Fast was just manna from heaven, really.
And yeah, this time in Joy Division, obviously New Order, Joy Division have a massive factory association, but you'd had the French Atmosphere release, you had
Sordid Sentimental, yeah.
yeah, the Deal for 11 EP, and the tracks with Bob. Was there a feeling that you would sign with anyone at that time, or was it just very much, it was mentioned before, everything was new and up in the air?
Well, I mean, we never had that ambition, really. We sort of lost that ambition when we got offered a contract with Radar Records, and we got offered £60,000. And to be honest with you, it was so much money, and none of us could even. It just seemed ridiculous. It was that much money. But when you started looking into it, Rob Gretton in particular was very worried about the control that they'd need and they'd want, and he got the impression that you'd be losing a lot if you did it. Tony was wonderful to work with. He was as wonderful as he was frustrating, but it was very exciting, you know. And as I say, it was every decision you made came from your heart. No decision was ever made, which I think is well documented, by your wallet, because we did everything we possibly could to screw it up. You know, giving away 2 tracks like Sordid Sentimental, you know, Atmosphere and Dead Souls, 2 of the best songs you'd ever written. And it was just right, boof, on to the next 2. You know, it was as simple as that. It was a wonderful attitude to have for a group, encouraged, and then underlined, if you like, by Bob and Fast Records. You knew it was okay, you know, just get on with it. Nothing was wasted. And I mean, it was quite, Joy Division were quite a unique band. I mean, they literally only existed professionally for 6 months before Ian unfortunately committed suicide. So you never really got in that position with a record company where they could change it. You hadn't had a hit. So you were still very, very young. When you got to New Order, you were starting again. It was like snakes and ladders. You'd gone right down to the bottom, but you had a wonderful relationship with Factory. And you know, the thing is that I had a much better relationship with Factory than I've ever had with Warner Brothers. You know, there's something about it's like being a packet of sugar in a supermarket. It was never like that in Factory. You know, we were lucky. I mean, we were lucky because we made great music. So literally, you'd be very difficult for any record company to fuck it up when you've got such a great band like Joy Division and such a great band as New Order. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, Factory Records had a good go, fucking it up. But you were all in it together, and there was the excitement, the mistakes, like Blue Monday, you know, costing 10p more to make than you could earn, and things like that. It made you more unique. And because of your attitude, because of what you'd grown up with as a musician, it was actually more interesting. You know, if Tony Wilson had come to me and said, oh, we've made 10p a copy on Blue Monday, that would have been really boring. You know, the fact that he came in and said, oh, we've lost 10p on every copy, we were like, yay! Well done, how did you manage that? You know, it gave you a unique selling point, the mistakes to do with it. And that stemmed from, you know, that anarchic attitude that Tony and Bob and Rob Gretton had. You know, it was they were literally changing the world, and they made great records while they were doing it.
I think that's actually really interesting, because I think so right fast with the anarchy, Tony and Bob. But the interesting thing with Bob is that once he went on to manage the Human League and got very much into publishing. And it'd be interesting, you have New Order, Joy Division were signed to Fast after they went on to see how you develop with the publishing shackles around you.
Well, I mean, the best thing that ever happened to us was not to be signed. You know, when Factory went bankrupt, we weren't an asset of the record company. You know, Tony very magnanimously and very generously gave us all the recordings. You know, he said, I've not made a success of it, but I'm not going to give you to somebody else. You know, you have it back, which was the most generous gesture, my God, that I've ever heard of in the history of music, you know, and we were allowed to go free, and we went to Warner Brothers on our terms, and that was a gift from Tony Wilson. You know, people like Tony Wilson, people like Bob Last are very, very few and far between in this business. There is an aura that people have like that, you know, where they're not a breadhead and they aren't out for themselves. It's all about the music, and it is very rare. It needs to be, you know, lauded. It needs to be enjoyed, because the world now is generally the opposite.
I think that's amazing you getting all your publishing. 'Cause we've had so many problems. So we've got to clear everything for the film, and dealing with some publishers and stuff, especially if it's sold to Universal, they just don't care about anything at all.
Well, Peter Saville has a theory that Universal in particular is staffed by a load of kids, about 20, 21, called Paris. And people like that, he said they're an ilk, and they don't know anything about music, and they don't care. And it's literally, computer says no.
I can totally believe that.
And that's what you miss, you know. I mean, we did have a wonderful period in music that you went through where the people were bigger than the companies, and that was something to be enjoyed, and that's what you need in music. There aren't many, as these people die off, they aren't being replaced. You know, managers, there aren't many big character managers anymore. They're all dealt with by companies, and you're assigned one guy and it's all handled through. It's so corporate. It's really, really boring. You know, Live Nation just need a pair of horns. That's all they need, as far as I'm concerned. You know, I work with them all the time, but they've certainly taken the fun out of rock and roll, and I'm not too sure it's a good thing, really. It's become very much a business. I suppose because I'm a much smaller fish now in a big sea, you can sort of keep some of the fun and the easiness that you had in those days. But it's very, very difficult. But it's nice, you know, whenever I get a copy of Earcom, oh wow, remember that, you know. How many record companies would let another record company put out a record? You know, Tony Wilson should go, no, Bob, no, they're my tracks, I'm putting them out. That's what happened nowadays. You just wouldn't be allowed to do it, you know. But then it was like, oh yeah, you know, great, brilliant, what a great idea. So you do miss those days, you really do.
Yeah, people have now, people like Simon Cowell and...
Oh, well, I mean, that's a programme in itself, isn't it, really? But you wouldn't put them in the same, certainly not in the same league, not on the same planet, to be honest.
So a couple of little things to finish up.
That's okay, mate.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the story about Middlesbrough.
Yeah, tell us, I was just kind of...
Yeah, I mean, Bob got us, he phoned up Rob and offered us a gig at Middlesbrough Rock Garden. And Rob took it. I don't think there was any money involved, to be honest. I think it was part of the promoting the single. When we got there, it was full of skinheads. Whoa, man, there was about 150 skins. It was a really heavy atmosphere. And we went on and played, and there was just pots flying over, plastic ones, luckily. And there was one kid that was sort of singling me out, and he'd hit me about 6 times with a plastic pint pot. And I was looking at these loads of skinheads. I was like, I've got no chance here, mate. And after the gig, when we were in the dressing room was L-shaped. And I remember there was a bit of a kerfuffle at the door. I was really annoyed because this kid had ruined it for me, you know. And Barney came back, and I said, well, what's going on then at the door? And he went, oh, it's Bob Last. It's nothing. I said, no, what was it? What was going on? He went, oh, Bob had brought that kid back that was throwing pots at you. And I went, what? He said, yeah. He said he had hold of him by the ear, like that. And he brought him to the dressing room to apologise. And Barney had told him it was all right. I was going, it's all right. I was fuming. It was probably a good thing, actually, that Bob didn't bring him back. But I thought it was wonderful that he'd actually gone out into the audience, seen this kid, got him by the ear, and brought him back to apologise. You know, I mean, how many people would do that? You know what I mean? And the other wonderful thing about that night, which was really odd, right at the end of the gig, Bob had got the sound guy to record the gig, Warsaw gig, and he came back in the dressing room right at the end, and he said, "Does anybody want this tape of the gig?" And everybody in the room went, "No, no." And I went, "I'll have it." And I got the tape of that gig, and that started me on a lifetime of bloody collecting. And now I've got tons of the stuff, and it became so important to me to document it. And now, 35 years, 37 years later or whatever, it's amazing how that little bit of kindness, the two bits of kindness that Bob did for you that night, was so important and made such a mark on you right the way through your career, you know. He taught me that you shouldn't let people get away with it, and people shouldn't behave like that, and you should pull them up. And also that, you know, what you were doing was important and needed documenting. So yeah, I've got a lot to thank him for, to say the least.
Brilliant. And just one little thing to finish up on. So, as mentioned before, we're doing a little bit on postcards as well as 75% a bit fast. Did you and Bernard produce an album for Paul Haig? From Joseph K.
Yeah, I mean, I know Paul, he did a wonderful version of Atmosphere that I play nearly every night I DJ, funnily enough, a dance version. And I think Bernard did it, I've got a feeling, unless my memory escapes me and I did it, I can't remember. But we did have a flirtation. I mean, you were always really jealous of those groups, Joseph K., Orange Juice, because they were such great bands. You know, there was definitely a rivalry in you, and with Bob, with his label, there was always that thing, oh God, that's good, isn't it? Because I've got a great tape of Orange Juice and Joseph K. when they played at Rafters. In my, thank you, Bob, for making me record everything after you set me off on the cassette trail. Yeah, and it's really good, great bootleg. I must do something with that sometime. Maybe if the boys want it, tell them they can have it. I'll dig it out for them. So yeah, I mean, you used to go and see them. You had to keep up with the competition. And Gang of Four, I always thought were a fantastic group. They recorded in Cargo, which is one of the reasons why we went to Cargo with John Briley to record it, because we were so impressed by Armalite Rifle. You know, that whole EP that the Gang of Four did. You know, it was a wonderful, wonderful record. So yeah, you know, you've definitely got a lot to thank him for. No shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
Just to finish off, you're talking about something a lot of people mention. There was like a little bit of rivalry between the bands, but did it seem that you were all part of like a big sort of gang together against?
Groups are very, very competitive. They always are. It's just something about you having that clique where you're like a little gang, and you're always trying to get one over on the other bands and all that lot. So whilst you're part of a family, I'm not too sure it's that happy family. You're always very eager to get one over on the other group, which we did many times, or for them to get one over on you. There's a lot of rivalry. I mean, I'm amazed really how competitive groups are. And when I got to DJing, I thought it'd be the same with DJs, and yeah, it's the exact opposite with DJs. DJs go out of the way to help each other. And yeah, it was like that, wow, you know, all the rivalry we used to have with all these groups that we saw coming up at the same time as Joy Division and New Order, Dexys, Orange Juice, God, you name them, you know, you were fighting tooth and nail. Every sound check you were playing with them, you were always trying to get one over on them so you got a better sound check and all that lot. So yeah, you were part of a family, but it wasn't happy. Very lot of sibling rivalry in those things. But no, I mean, it was, you know, when you think about it compared to nowadays, how small it was and how special those bands were. You know, Tony, Rob and Bob, they were great at spotting good groups. They really, really were. You know, and they weren't A&R men either, which is the interesting thing. They were the guys that actually put the records out. So there was no middleman. So no, it was good, admirable.
And just to finally finish up,
we're going to be here all day with you saying that.
Obviously, you're talking about New Order, being a factory, indie label. Tony gave you everything back, and it allowed you to sign to a major.
Yeah, on our own terms. Yeah.
But what's the big difference between being in an indie group, dealing with people like Tony and Bob, compared with major?
Well, I mean, it was quite interesting with Tony because, like, the first time we met him and we were talking about doing this thing, you know, you still have in your head this thing about, oh, you're going to sign for 5 LPs, you know, you're going to be able to give up your job and all that crap. And literally, Tony never talked like that. You know, he said, well, we'll do what we can. We'll do it. I think you're a great group. You know, let's work together. And as long as we get on, we'll stay together. And if we don't get on, we won't be together. And we thought, wow. You know, that made signing these contracts that were like that thick in perpetuity, which was always the phrase they used then, forever, just seemed ridiculous. You know, we were very, very lucky to have a one-to-one relationship with a gentleman. And the thing is that, you know, we all make mistakes. He made as many as anybody. His mistakes were so monumental, they became like achievements. And it was nice to be part of that. You really did feel special in doing that, you know. And there was also the other aspect of, there's that thing whenever a band got signed, they'd run away to London. And Rob Gretton felt that it was very, very important to keep our identity in Manchester. We were all great fans of Manchester as a place, and it was easy to big it up. You know, Tony in particular just said, well, you don't have to go to London, we can do whatever they can. And he might have been bullshitting for all I know, but he worked. You know, and that's the thing about it for Joy Division and New Order. It worked being on Factory, and it gave us something absolutely unique. And we had the freedom to enjoy ourselves by doing Sordid Sentimental, by doing Bob's Earcom record, you know. And it's very important for a group. It was important for our development. So yeah, I mean, they really were golden times, and it saddens you really to think that, you know, a thing that's just as wonderful as the internet can stop people doing that because you can't sell them anymore. You know, I know there's a resurgence in vinyl, so maybe if people started doing sampler vinyls, they might be able to sell them. But that is a time in music that's gone, and I think music is much the sadder for it.
Perfect. Thank you very much.